Personally, I like the Loch Ness monster that had Hitler's face. Whoever drew that was genius. He should have won.
I wonder who drew a Loch Ness monster with Hitler's face.
Joseph Mengele.
Completely right. The women's a minibus. She leaves. Anyway, Ronan Coghlan is a feckless rogue. He is invisible in cinema foyers. There is just like a smell of brisket, but you can't see it. His favourite part of a goat is its shins, and his favourite odour is that of a weather vane. He is also the author of the book Pavement Boy, which is about a boy who is raised by paving stones. Take it away, Ronan.
Ronan Coghlan.
Thank you. It's funny how things work out. If my grandfather had not shot my grandmother's brother dead, I would not be here today and you would not be watching. Now you might wonder how this happened, but he shot my grandmother's brother dead and then he married her because he thought he ought to do something to make up for it. And 62 years ago, to the very day I was born, a beautiful child. That is why I talk slowly and look wizened. And I'm going to tell you about the Holy Grail today because there have been a lot of books about the Holy Grail. The most famous, I suppose, being the fiction by Dan Brown. The only trouble is Dan Brown gave people to understand it was not fiction but fact, which unfortunately is a load of... Now, I'm just looking at the age range of people here before I decide what I'll call it a load of. Well, let us say it is not to be relied upon. What was the Holy Grail? I mean, what is a grail anyway? You don't normally say. Any grails about? Or I'd like to buy a grail, or do you stock grails in the supermarket? People are walking out already, I can see. I'm making a good impression here. Do you stock grails in the supermarket? Well, a grail was actually a quite common word. It meant a dish. It could be applied to various kinds of dish. Generally, it was a dish with a fish. Beginning to sound like a low now. A dish with a fish. It could hold a lamprey. So if you want anything to hold your lampreys in, get a grail. But where did the story come from? Now, it is set in the reign of King Arthur. Many years ago, 20 at least, I wrote a book about King Arthur, and the one thing people ask me all the time is, did he ever exist? To which I can give a firm answer, I don't know. In the time I wrote that, academic opinion tended to think, yes, there might have been a King Arthur. It's changed a little since then. The academics have scratched their academic heads and said, no, I don't think there was a King Arthur. But actually nobody knows. But it is important to remember the Arthurian background because of what I'm going to tell you. You see, I told you this was going to be a serious lecture. You thought there were going to be jokes and things. Foolish man. Now, King Arthur would have lived, if he did, in the 5th to the 6th century, at the time the Anglo-Saxons, that your ancestors, a bloodthirsty lot, were invading Britain. And the ancestors of the Welsh, represented here today by Oliver, who was born in, you're a Welshman of the deepest dye, aren't you? Born in Kent. Now, the thing is that Oliver is the sole aborigine in our midst. But the thing is that King Arthur apparently fought against the Saxons. And he may have existed because there is a King Arthur-shaped gap in history when the Saxons were curtailed. Now, it's in that setting that the story of the Holy Grail came forward. A lot of the ancient Britons, the ancestor of the Welsh, started saying, it's not really safe here, let's go across to Brittany. So they crossed in great numbers. And just at the same time, France was coming into being. Cooking took on a whole new meaning. Frogs were no longer safe. Now, the Bretons had all the legends of King Arthur, which they passed on to the French poets. And it is the first of these French poets who wrote the first Grail romance. His name was Chrétien de Troyes. And if anyone, I shall warn you at this stage, criticizes my pronunciation of French or Welsh names, or indeed names in any tongue, I shall be miffed. I shall huff. But let me get on. Now, the version anyone who's read the Grail stories knows is probably the latest version. In that, King Arthur and his knights are seated at the table, in comes the Grail and it feeds them all, rather like a delivery from a Chinese restaurant. Nothing particularly holy about it, but immediately King Arthur cries, "We must go and find the Grail." Or rather, you must go. He didn't do any questing himself. He sent the knights forth to do it. Everybody thought the brave Sir Lancelot would surely find it. But of course nobody knew the brave Sir Lancelot was having a rather torrid affair with the Queen at the time, and therefore he wasn't chased, except by the Queen. And the others thought Sir Gawain, now he was the one to do it, but Sir Gawain was a bit of a ruffian, typical warrior of the time. Sorry, my false teeth are slipping up and down. There, that's them straightened. It always happens at the most embarrassing moment. Now, anyway, Sir Gawain was not the one chosen. Instead, 3 knights were chosen, the leading one of whom was Sir Galahad. Sir Galahad had been such a good person that he never did anything worth talking about. So he was fairly safe. Sir Percival and Sir Bors. These 3 went galloping off. They found the Grail in the city of Sarras. Galahad was so overcome by the vision that he died. Percival was so overcome by the vision that he died. Bors got away because he'd had sex once. Now, the thing is that that is very much the final version. It started off with Chrétien de Troyes. He got his information from the Breton poets. And he is the first to tell of the Grail. He tells of Percival. For him, Percival is the one who found the Grail. Now, Percival was raised in the forest by his mother because there were nasty men out there. You mustn't mix with nasty men, she had warned him. But he found out about knighthood, and he wished to become a knight. He abandoned his mother and headed for Camelot. And when he got there, everyone took one look at his scruffy apparel and burst into loud guffaws. I've had the same problem myself. Now, it so happened that into the court came a knight in red armour. He strode up to Guinevere the Queen and seized a cup from her hand and dashed it to the ground and strode out. They always seem to do these things for no particular reason. But the thing was that the king said, "Who will pursue the Red Knight?" The Red Knight was a tough-looking bloke, and even the brave Sir Lancelot wasn't going to do it. Nor yet the brave Sir Gawain. "I'll do it, sir," said Percival, who had a strange rustic accent, and he therefore set off upon his horse, which was an old nag, a phrase which always puts me in mind of my wife, and he set off into the distance. He overcame the Red Knight, but did not kill him. He sent him back. And he continued on his way until he came to a strange and mysterious castle. In the moat of the castle, or in a stream nearby, there were two people fishing. "Hello," said Percival. "Who are you?" "My name is Bronn," said one of them. "I noticed the fisher king." "Oh, that'll be because you do that fishing," said Percival. "That's it. Come and stay for tea," said Bronn. So in they went, and he was given a sumptuous meal, and then a strange procession entered the room. To get the order of the strange procession correctly, because it varies from writer to writer. First of all, there came a youth with a bleeding lance. Now that is not me using bad language, it means the lance was bleeding from the tip of it. Then two boys carrying candlesticks, and finally a maid, a beautiful virgin. There were quite a lot of them about in those days, carrying the Grail. Now Percival had been warned that gentlemen did not ask too many questions. He really wanted to ask, "Who's that over there, and what's that thing she's carrying?" But he refrained. Bronn bade him good night, and Percival went to bed. In the morning he found himself still in the castle, but it was abandoned. Not a soul was there. "Oh dear," he thought, "what have I done?" Whenever there was trouble, his mother had always blamed him, so he always thought he had done something wrong. So he exited the castle, but he didn't go long before he met a crone. A crone, or an old lady. These romances are full of crones. These people aren't supposed to have lived very long, but yet in Arthurian romances there's always a crone or two hiding behind a tree. "Ah, silly boy," said the crone. "You did not ask the question, what is the Grail? Whom does it serve? Look at this land all around, it is wasteland." "Oh yes, I hadn't really noticed that, wasteland. But if you had asked the question, the Fisher King would have been healed, and the land would have flourished once more." "Oh dear," said Percival. "He was wounded through the..." Now the romance says through the thighs, but I think it may have been a wound of a more intimate nature, because in mythology, the king was always regarded as the symbol of fertility in the land. But it's always referred to as the thighs. So Percival hung his head, had many other adventures, eventually came back, asked the question, and all was well. But we're not actually told what the Grail was in the first of these romances, because poor old Chrétien dropped dead before he finished it. But others continued it. They said it was the cup brought by Joseph of Arimathea to Britain, the cup either that Jesus used at the Last Supper, or one in which he had collected blood from the cross. And you're all familiar with Blake's hymn Jerusalem, suggesting Jesus came to Britain. Well, there seems to have grown up a legend that Joseph of Arimathea, before Jesus was dead, had brought him there a couple of times. And the story of the Grail being brought to Britain isn't a terribly exciting one. Joseph of Arimathea managed to get the Grail, and he brought it across, and he went to Glastonbury, where he stuck his staff in the ground, and it blossomed as the Glastonbury thorn. I'm sure most of you are familiar with the old legend. Now, the wasteland being cleared of everything seems to have been what the Grail was all about. But where did such an idea come from? Well, the thing is that Celtic myth is full of tales of magic cauldrons. These cauldrons are cauldrons of plenty. If food is a bit scarce, you went on a quest for a cauldron of plenty, and you didn't suffer any more. You just dipped into it. It appears to have belonged to the gods. But this story was Christianized, and the big cauldron became Small Grail, and Percival discovered it. Except there are other versions. The Welsh version features a character not called Percival, but called Peredur. And he didn't see a grail in the procession at all. He saw a bleeding head, again no bad language used there, on a plate. What does that mean, he asked. Oh, said the ancient Welsh king in whose castle that was. That be your cousin. No, that's not a Welsh accent. That is your cousin. And the 9 hags of Gloucester killed him. So go out and knock 7 bells out of the 9 hags of Gloucester at once. Now you might think 9 hags, old women, a knight beating up old, surely not. But the 9 hags of Gloucester were tough eggs, I can tell you. They all wore helmets and carried swords, and looked like Xena warrior princesses you look in about 20 years' time. They were a formidable bunch, but Peredur managed to kill them all. There were 9 of them. Celtic mythology is full of allusions to 9 persons, 9 women or priestesses who have the power to change themselves into animals and to guard an otherworldly mystery cauldron. And there is no doubt that it is from this source the Grail story came. But somewhere along the line, the head version got lost. Now, that's all very well, but the original story of the Grail seems to go back even further, because there was an old Welsh poem called Prydau Nuvin. Prydau Nuvin mean, well, Ollie is a Welshman, so he'll translate it for us. What does Prydau Nuvin mean, Ollie?
I don't know.
Yeah, it does, yes, and Anún, or as it was pronounced in Old Welsh, Anún is the modern Welsh pronunciation. Anúvin, well, that was the other world. Now that didn't necessarily mean it was a hellish kind of world. The other world was quite a pleasant place once you got there. These days Ryanair would be selling tickets there cheaply. I flew over by Ryanair. The safety instructions were in Polish, but apart from that, it was fine. Anyway, the thing is, in this, Arthur makes his journey. He is the questioner. He goes to Anúvin to get the cauldron, pearl-rimmed and attended by 9 sisters. But of those who went, 7 alone returned. Now, modern scholarship is inclining more and more to the impression that Arthur was a god in origin rather than a historical character. And strangely enough, there's a parallel tale from Welsh mythology featuring a character called Bron. Now, Bron, if you remember, was the name of the Fisher King, and Bron had been wounded in the foot by a spear. Again, a foot is a euphemism, we think. The story of Bron involved the fact that his sister married the King of Ireland, and Ireland takes the place of the other world there. I think Ireland is called Iwerddon in Welsh, something like that. Yes, yes, Glover supports my Cymric knowledge. Anyway, off went Bron when he discovered the King of Ireland was mistreating his sister. He had been sent a message by carrier pigeon, because that seemed to be used in those days. And Bron was so tall he could stride through the Irish Sea, and the water only came up to his knees. And they had the most terrible battle with the Irish, because the Irish had a cauldron of plenty, and not alone was it full of plenty, but if one of their soldiers was killed, they just dumped him in the cauldron of plenty and he came alive again. Medically advanced, the early Irish were, I always feel. So, after the most scarifying battle, they returned, but only 7, just like in Arthur's case in Prydau Nuvin, only 7 returned, including Bron. who was in a much better state of health now, but for some reason he said, "Now listen here, boyos. I want you to do something for me." So his 6 followers said, "Oh, what can we do?" "I want you to cut off my head." And the other said, "Are you absolutely sure about this now? Because this is a kind of irrevocable act, as it were. Once your head is cut off, we can't do a lot with it." "Oh, it won't kill me," said Bron. I'm a god after all." And so Bron's head was taken off, but it was pretty good at chattering as they made their way back across Britain. Now the story of Bron seizing the cauldron of plenty, the story of Arthur seizing the cauldron of plenty from the other world, this seems to be the origin of the Grail story, which underwent a Christian refashioning with Chrétien de Troyes. The only trouble was, there was a German who read Chrétien and thought, "My goodness, I will make a German version of this. Now, let's see, once upon a time." The only trouble was his French wasn't all that good, and he thought the Grail was a stone that had fallen from the crown of Lucifer. He also put in another character, Percival's father, whose name was Gahmoret. Gahmoret was married to a lady with the name of Herzeloid. You don't hear that name used very often these days. And Herzeloid said to her husband, in German, of course, "Mein Liebchen, surely you are not going so soon after we are married on a dangerous quest?" "I'll go on a quest when I want to go on a quest. I won't be intimidated by any housefrau." And he jumped on his horse. He went to Ethiopia, and there he found the Queen of Zazamak, a person of dusky hue, was being besieged by an army from Scotland and Greenland. One can imagine, in the depths of the Ethiopian highlands, large coteries of kilted persons and Eskimos besieging this city. "I will raise the siege," said Gahmoret, and he did. He drove them off, and then he married Zazamak. Of course, he had another wife at home, but God, they were an odd bunch in those days. And they had a little boy, and he was called Fierabras. Now, the trouble was, Wolfram, who wrote the poem, had never met anyone who was of mixed race. People didn't know much about mixed race then, so he said this little baby was piebald, white skin with big black patches. Now, most of the rest of the story, actually, follows Chrétien. But he meets up with Fierabras, and the two of them, first Percival, or as it's called in the German epic, Parzival, and Fierabras aren't too sure about each other, but they eventually become close friends. And at the end of it, the Grail is achieved, this time from a king whose name is Anfortas, which seems to be just a corruption of the Latin word infirmitas, which means infirm, which is a condition I have suffered from for some years. Now, the thing here is that Wolfram said there was a body of knights called the Templisten, and that Parzival joined them. And this has led to the belief that the Grail was somehow connected with the Templars. It wasn't. The Templisten actually existed. They were a completely different order of knights. Well now, the Holy Grail has come to me. Any artifact that people are seeking for, any goal they have, that is worthy. And as Jonathan has asked me to keep this talk rather short, because he tells me your attention span is very limited, I shall now go and seek the Holy Grail. My horse! Bring me my horse!
Greg, you need a horse.
It's coming. There is a horse on hand. My horse! Where is my horse? Greg, will you get that blooming horse down here? It's coming! horse, my beloved steed. My horse normally neighs when I tweak its ear, but unfortunately I'm told it is not turned on. I'm off. I am off to find the Holy Grail. Excelsior!
Ladies and gentlemen, Ronan Coghlan.